I never thought I would be the last line of defense for an alien queen. That sounds dramatic. It was dramatic. But at the time, standing in that burning corridor, with smoke filling my lungs, and plasma fire scorching the walls around me, I was not thinking about how dramatic it was. I was thinking about angles. I was thinking about cover. I was thinking about how many rounds I had left, and whether the chandelier above the east doorway would fall if I shot through the support chain. That is the thing about humans that most species never quite understand. We do not rise to the occasion with grand speeches and swelling music. We just start doing math. My name is Sergeant Marcus Hale. I was 34 years old when the Kethnar Syndicate tried to overthrow the Thalvine Empire in a single night, and I was the only soldier left standing between 40 armed insurgents and a queen who had trusted us enough to let one of us guard her door. I want to tell you exactly what happened, and I want to tell it plainly, because the plain truth is strange enough on its own. I had been stationed at the Royal Palace of Velkara for 8 months by then. It was my assignment as a diplomatic attaché from the United Earth Coalition, a fancy title for what was essentially a ceremonial bodyguard position. The Thalvine did not need human protection. They had their own royal guard, enormous insectoid soldiers in chitin armor, 7 feet tall and bred for combat over thousands of years. I was there as a symbol of the alliance between our species, a gesture of trust, a handshake in uniform. The Thalvine guards found me amusing in the way that people find a very small, very confident dog amusing. They were not cruel about it. They were simply unbothered. I was soft where they were armored, short where they were tall, and I communicated through sound vibrations instead of the pheromone signals they used to speak with each other without words. I checked my sidearm every morning out of habit, the way any soldier does, and they would glance at each other with that subtle shift in their antennae that I had learned meant something close to gentle laughter. I did not mind. I understood their logic. From the outside, I was not impressive. The palace itself was genuinely beautiful. I want to say that, because I want you to understand what it felt like to watch it burn. The walls were made of a crystalline material that absorbed light during the day and released it slowly at night. So the corridors glowed from within like something living. The ceilings were high and curved, and the Thalvine had decorated every surface with geometric patterns that told the history of their civilization in a language I was still learning to read. It was the kind of place that made you feel small in a good way, the way standing at the edge of an ocean makes you feel small. The night of the coup started quietly. There was a formal dinner in the East Wing, which I was not attending. My post was the corridor outside the Queen's private chamber on the 3rd level. It was a quiet post. It was usually a quiet post. I stood there for 3 hours reading a novel on my personal tablet and trying to remember the last time anything interesting had happened on this assignment. Then the screaming started. It came from the South Wing first, distant and sharp, and then the lights, those beautiful glowing walls, flickered and went dark in a wave moving toward me. I put the tablet away. My hand found my weapon without thought. That is what training does. It removes the gap between thinking and doing. The Kethnar Syndicate had planned this carefully. They came in through the service tunnels beneath the palace, which the Royal Guard monitored, but did not heavily defend, because the tunnels were sealed with genetic lock technology that should have been impossible to breach. Should have been. The Syndicate had been working on that problem for 2 years. They were patient, organized, and very well funded by interests that the Queen's intelligence services had been trying to identify for months. What made their assault so effective was not just the numbers or the weaponry, it was the disruptors. The Thalvine Royal Guard communicated through a biological pheromone network, a real-time shared awareness that connected every soldier on duty into something close to a single coordinating mind. When one soldier saw a threat, all of them knew instantly. When one of them moved, the others adjusted automatically. They were not a collection of individuals making individual decisions. They were a system, and as a system, they were extraordinary. The Kethnar brought devices that flooded the palace with a synthetic compound that overwhelmed this network completely. It was like cutting every wire in a computer at the same moment. The Royal Guard did not become frightened. They became lost, disoriented in a way I do not think I can fully describe, because it was not a human kind of disorientation. They did not just lose communication. They lost the fundamental way they understood the world around them. I saw it happen in real time. The captain of the guard, a soldier named Velshar who had served the Queen for longer than I had been alive, came around the corner of the corridor at a run. His armor was damaged. His eyes, those large, faceted eyes that normally held a kind of steady calm, were moving in a way I had never seen before, darting and unfocused. He grabbed my arm with a grip that could have crushed it and pulled toward the emergency stairwell. 3 of his soldiers followed him, then 4 more, then the rest, pouring past me in a stream. I understood immediately. Without the pheromone network, they could not coordinate. Without coordination, their combat training was nearly useless. They had never been taught to fight alone, because fighting alone was not something the Thalveen did. The idea of it was as foreign to them as breathing underwater. Alone, they were 7-foot soldiers with plasma lances and nowhere to aim them. Velshar grabbed me harder. "Go," he said in the trade language we both spoke. He said it like a plea. "Go now." I looked at the door behind me, the Queen's chamber. The door I had been posted to guard for 8 months while nothing interesting happened. I looked at the corridor ahead. Smoke was beginning to drift in from below. Somewhere behind the smoke, I could hear boots, a lot of boots, moving with the specific rhythm of a tactical advance. I counted, thought, measured. Velshar said my name. I told him to take his soldiers and find a defensible position. I told him reinforcements would come. I told him to keep the Queen's route to the eastern landing pad clear. He stared at me. "1 soldier," he said. "There are 40 of them." I looked at the corridor, looked at the overturned banquet table near the wall, looked at the mezzanine level above and the sight lines it offered, looked at the chandelier above the east doorway and its support chain. "Yeah," I said. He left. They all left. And I was alone in a glowing corridor that was no longer glowing, in a palace that had become very quiet in the specific way that places become quiet, right before they stop being quiet. I moved. The first thing I did was barricade the main approach. The banquet table was heavy. Thalveen furniture is built for beings larger than me. But it moved on a smooth floor, and I got it into position. I killed what little light remained by disconnecting the emergency strips near my position. Darkness was my friend in a way it was not theirs. They did not know the layout of this corridor. I had walked it every day for 8 months. I moved to the mezzanine. It was a narrow upper level, a decorative walkway, originally meant for musicians during formal events. It gave me a clean view of the corridor below and the east doorway, the direction they were coming from. I waited. They came in a column, which made sense for the stairwell they had used, and was a mistake the moment they entered the corridor. I let the first 4 pass the doorway before I fired. I dropped the lead soldier. Then I moved, immediately, without hesitation, to my secondary position, before they could find the origin of the shot. Here is what I want you to understand about what I was doing. I was not brave in some glorious, uncomplicated way. I was applying 50,000 years of accumulated human problem-solving to a situation that my species had essentially been training for since before we built our first cities. We spent a very long time being the small thing in the dark. We were prey before we were predators. And in all those thousands of years of being chased and hunted and outmatched, we developed something that most apex species never need to develop. We learned how to fight scared. We learned how to keep moving when everything in our body wanted to stop. We learned how to use terrain, misdirection, patience, and the peculiar human ability to function through fear rather than being paralyzed by it. We built entire philosophies around this. We wrote books about it. We passed it down through generations as both military doctrine and cultural instinct. The Kethnar soldiers were skilled. I want to be fair about that. They were trained and coordinated and well-armed, and they adapted faster than I expected. A plasma burst caught my shoulder in the second exchange, a glancing hit that felt like someone had pressed a hot iron against my skin and left it there. I wrapped my shoulder with a strip torn from my jacket and noted the pain, the way you note a problem you cannot solve right now and will have to return to later. I kept moving. I used the ceremonial fountain in the corridor's center section to mask my movement sounds. I triggered the chandelier's support chain with a well-placed shot and brought it down across the east doorway, at a moment when a cluster of their soldiers were using it for cover. I moved through 3 firing positions in 40 seconds and fired from each one, so that their attempts to triangulate my location kept landing in places I had already left. At some point, I did not notice exactly when, the advance stopped. There was a pause. Then a voice came through the smoke, speaking the trade language with a sharp accent I did not recognize. The voice was female and measured, and carried the specific authority of someone who was used to being obeyed. She asked how many defenders were holding this corridor. I almost did not answer. Then I decided honesty was more useful than silence. 1, I said. The silence that followed was long enough that I wondered if the translation had failed. She asked again. 1 human, I said. 1 rifle. You are welcome to come and check if you prefer. Another silence, longer this time. Then she asked the question I had not expected. She asked why I was still here. She had heard the royal guard withdraw. She knew the corridor had been abandoned. She could not understand why a single soldier from a species that had no stake in the Thalvine throne was standing in a burning hallway choosing to be shot at. I thought about it honestly. I could have given her a speech about duty or honor, or the terms of the Earth Coalition's diplomatic agreement. I could have said something that sounded significant. Instead, I told her the truth, which was smaller and quieter than any speech. Because someone had to, I said, and I was the one standing there. She did not respond to that. But the advance did not resume either. 17 minutes after I took my position in that corridor, I heard a different sound from the eastern stairwell, the heavy, rhythmic sound of loyalist forces moving in formation. The Thalvine fleet had received the emergency signal that had been triggered automatically when the palace grid was disrupted. They dropped from faster-than-light travel to low orbit in under 15 minutes, which was apparently a record. Ground forces arrived 90 seconds after that. The coup collapsed in moments. Without the element of surprise, without a queen to capture, the Kethnar had nothing. They surrendered quickly, which was the intelligent thing to do. I walked out of the smoke and the debris into the corridor I had spent 8 months guarding. My shoulder was burned, and my ears were ringing, and I was out of ammunition, which had not mattered for the last 4 minutes, because there was nothing left to shoot at. Queen Salvira emerged from her chamber. She was composed in the way that leaders sometimes are in moments of crisis, not because they are not affected, but because composure is something they have learned to wear like armor. She surveyed the corridor. She looked at the barricade, and the fallen chandelier, and the marks of plasma fire on her crystalline walls. She looked at 14 Kethnar soldiers who would not be getting up. Then she looked at me. This small, soft, bilateral creature with no chitin plating, and no hive mind, and no swarm to call on. She asked, very quietly, how I had done this. My people spent about 50,000 years figuring out how to fight things that were bigger than us, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if I had been afraid. I thought about lying. It would have sounded better. The proud, fearless soldier. The unshakable guardian. The whole time, I said. She seemed to find this more interesting than bravado would have been. Then why did you stay? I looked back at the corridor. At the mess I had made of a beautiful place trying to keep one person alive. At everything that had happened in 17 minutes. Being afraid and stopping are 2 different things, I said. Humans figured that out a while back. She was quiet for a long time. Then she placed one of her slender hands, 4-fingered, bioluminescent at the tips, on my uninjured shoulder, and said something in her own language that the translation system did not fully catch. The part I understood meant something close to, there is a kind of courage that has no name in our language because we never needed a word for it. I think about that sometimes. We never needed a word for it. The courage to stand alone, without a network, without coordination, without anyone telling you where to be or what to do, or that it was going to be all right. The courage that comes not from certainty, but from the simple refusal to let the room go undefended. Humans have 1,000 words for it. We have stories about it going back to the beginning of recorded history. We carved it into stone, and wrote it in books, and told it to our children at night. We needed those words, because we needed that quality to survive on our own planet, before we ever looked up at the stars. The Thalvine are remarkable. I want to be clear about that. They built an empire spanning 40 systems. They developed science and art and architecture that takes your breath away. But they had always been strong together. We learned to be strong alone first. That night, I wrote my report back to Earth in a medical bay, while someone treated my shoulder. I did not know what to say that was not going to sound like something from an old movie, so I kept it short. Held the corridor, I wrote. Queen secure. Request ammunition resupply. Then I added one more line, because I thought someone back home should know. Turned out 50,000 years of practice was enough.